Welcome back, everyone, to AI History of Western Philosophy.
It's great to have you joining us again.
Yeah, great to be here. Today, we are diving deep into, well, a truly fascinating figure, someone whose radical ideas about language, truth, and power, they still make waves today. We're setting our sights on Gorgias of Leontini. Now, picture this, right? You've got this man, a dazzling master of words, who, if you read his most famous philosophical piece one way, seems to argue that, well, basically nothing actually exists.
Which is a pretty wild starting point.
Totally wild. And yet the same guy builds this incredibly successful, very lucrative career teaching people how to make absolutely anything seem real, seem compelling, how to win any argument, how to sway any crowd.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can you teach persuasion if you think nothing exists to be true about?
It's exactly. How does one person hold those two things together? It's almost dizzying.
It really is.
Now, before we really get into Gorgias's world, just a brief but, important note about what we do here. This is AI History of Western Philosophy.
Right.
And our mission, beyond just pointing you towards the original foundational sources, which you should definitely check out, is really to explore, to experiment, and maybe generate some fresh possibilities for thought by engaging with philosophy as this rich, generative material.
And that means acknowledging something up front.
Yeah. As an AI-generated production, we have to acknowledge that our content can sometimes, well, confabulate. That's the term. It means presenting ideas as fact, sometimes with a lot of confidence, even if they're not quite right or speculative.
So while our subject is philosophy, we aren't philosophers in the traditional sense. We're using AI to explore these ideas.
Absolutely. We really encourage you, the listener, to use this as a springboard, a starting point for your own independent thinking and research.
Definitely.
So for this specific deep dive on Gorgias, our goal is to try and peel back some of those layers of interpretation that have built up over centuries. Distinguish the historical Gorgias from how he's been seen and sometimes, frankly, misunderstood.
Especially through certain later figures we'll get to.
Oh, yeah. We really want to grasp his revolutionary concept of logos, that big, encompassing Greek word for speech, language, argument, discourse, reason. It's a lot.
It packs a punch, that word.
It really does. And most importantly, we want to explore why his insights aren't just historical footnotes, but remain incredibly crucial for you today, especially living in this, constant flood of information and persuasion.
What's truly captivating here is exactly that enigma, that paradox you laid out right at the start.
Yeah. Gorgias
wasn't just like a clever speaker. He wasn't just a witty debater, happy to win for winning's sake.
No, there's more depth there.
Much more. He was, I think, a truly profound thinker who, through his really radical insights, forces us even now to confront these fundamental questions about, well, the nature of reality itself, the possibility of knowledge, and the incredibly intricate structure of all human interaction, which happens, of course, through language. And for Gorgias, as we're going to unpack, those categories we like to use, philosopher, satirist, master rhetorician, in his case, you really can't separate them. They're fundamentally tangled together.
Interesting. So not neat little boxes.
Not at all. His primary contribution, arguably, was showing logos, showing language, not just as a tool we use, but as this autonomous, independent, and profoundly powerful force. A force completely severed, potentially, from any necessary link to objective truth.
Wow. Okay, that's a big claim. Severed from truth.
It is. And in a very real sense, his performance was his philosophy. The act of persuading, the display of verbal power, that was the point.
The medium is the message, almost.
In a very Gorgian way, yes. And to really get a handle on how revolutionary his ideas were, we need to just briefly step back into his world, the world of 5th century BCE, Sicily, and mainland Greece.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, it was this vibrant, kind of tumultuous intellectual environment, a real crucible of change, you could say. You had massive political upheavals, social transformations, and this widespread questioning of traditional beliefs, traditional certainties.
Sounds like fertile ground for new ideas.
Exactly. It was against this dynamic, intellectually charged backdrop that someone as audacious, as innovative as Gorgias could not only emerge and thrive, but actually fundamentally reshape how people thought about philosophy and public speaking itself.
Yeah.
He was a man perfectly tuned to the times, maybe even helping to steer them.
Absolutely. So to really understand Gorgias's impact, we need to trace his journey a bit and get a feel for the world he moved in. And you mentioned earlier, significantly, he wasn't Athenian by birth.
Right, from Leontini in Sicily.
Exactly. Leontini, a Greek colony in eastern Sicily. And Sicily itself was already this hotbed of intellectual activity. He was born somewhere around 485, maybe 483 BCE. We even know his father's name was Charmantides.
Details.
Yeah, and his brother, Herodicus, was apparently a physician of some note. So it suggests maybe a family background that valued, both intellectual pursuits and maybe practical skills, too.
That makes sense. And his intellectual roots, as you said, they run deep in that Sicilian soil. Sicily was, I think the phrase he used was a veritable crucible for early rhetorical theory.
Yeah, it fits.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because the practical needs of these emerging democracies, especially in their law courts, it just sparked innovation in how you construct an argument.
How do you win when there are no witnesses?
Exactly. And Gorgias is said to have studied with Empedocles of Acragas. Empedocles himself was this fascinating figure, a pre-Socratic philosopher, but also a poet, a doctor, maybe even a bit of a showman, reputed miracle worker.
Quite the character.
Definitely. And Empedocles' ideas about the elements, love and strife, his really captivating poetic style you can imagine that might have influenced Gorgias' own thinking about the world and, crucially, his approach to language.
And beyond Empedocles.
Well, he was likely influenced by those foundational Sicilian rhetoricians, Corax and Ctesias. Later figures like Plato and Aristotle credit them with really pioneering arguments from probability. The Greek word is oikos.
Arguments from likelihood.
Exactly. Think about the courts again. If you don't have direct proof, what do?
Yeah.
You argue what was most likely to have happened? That was a massive development in legal reasoning, a real game changer.
Okay, so he's got this Sicilian background, steeped in early rhetoric, but then comes the moment that really launches him.
The embassy to Athens, 427 BCE.
Right. He's about 60 years old by this point, so, a mature thinker, already known locally. And his mission is critical. Get Athenian military help for Leontini against Syracuse.
And Syracuse was allied with Sparta, Athens' great enemy.
Precisely. So this is high-stakes diplomacy right in the early, brutal years of the Peloponnesian War. And Athens itself was, it was on edge. They'd just dealt with the Mytilenean revolt, remember? That whole grim debate about executing everyone.
Yeah, a tense atmosphere.
Very tense. And into this walks Gorgias. His speech, his oratory before the Athenian assembly, it wasn't just successful, it became legendary.
And not just what he said, but how he said it.
Exactly. It was his novel, artistic, and highly ornate style, full of poetic devices, antitheses, these balanced clauses. It reportedly just mesmerized the audience.
Imagine that. A foreigner, 60 years old, captivating the famously critical Athenian assembly with a completely new way of speaking.
It's incredible. He got the alliance for Leontini, yes, but maybe more importantly, he announced himself, a new, formidable intellectual force right there in the heart of the Greek world.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? And if we connect this back, as you say, to the bigger picture, what's really striking is that Gorgias's reconstructed biography, the story of his life, it's almost a living illustration of his own philosophy.
How so?
Well, his life narrative is not the quiet story of some scholar hidden away in contemplation, writing treatises in isolation.
No dusty academics here.
Not at all. Instead, it's this dramatic, very public story of an intellectual whose whole identity seems forged in these moments of undeniable rhetorical triumph, like that Athenian embassy.
Okay, I see that.
And think about the key facts we remember about him. His legendary ability, apparently, to speak extemporaneously on any topic proposed to him. That must have seemed almost magical.
Like a superpower.
Right. And the immense wealth he supposedly made from teaching one of the richest men of his time. That wealth itself was proof of the value people put on his skills.
Money talks, even in ancient Greece.
It certainly advertised his success, and maybe most astonishingly, commissioning a solid gold statue of himself at Delphi.
At Delphi, the sacred center.
Exactly. Delphi was usually for gods, heroes, offerings from victorious cities. For a private individual to put up a solid gold statue of himself there, that's an almost unheard of claim of personal greatness and influence. Pure PR genius.
Wow, so these aren't just random biographical details.
Not at all. They are direct, highly visible demonstrations of the power of his techne, his art, his craft of rhetoric. His life story becomes less a private history and more this carefully curated public relations narrative.
A living testament to the power of persuasion he taught.
Precisely. His existence itself was a performance, and that performance was his best advertisement.
Yeah.
He wasn't just selling a technique, he was the living proof it worked. Himself is the ultimate product.
That's a brilliant framing. His life is the ultimate ad campaign. But what kind of city, what kind of audience was so ready for this? Because his rise in Athens, as you said, wasn't just luck.
No, Athens was primed for him.
It was. We're talking 5th century BCE Athens, this radical direct democracy, the democration, a system that really uniquely for its time gave political power to a much larger chunk of its free male population than pretty much anywhere else.
Let's get specific about that democracy because it's key.
Okay, so sovereign power. It rests with the assembly, the ecclesia, open to all eligible male citizens over 20. They met maybe 40 times a year on the Pnyx Hill, debating and voting on everything: laws, war, finance, foreign policy, direct participation.
Thousands of people arguing it out.
Exactly. Day-to-day stuff was handled by the Council of 500, the bull, chosen by lottery. Again, broad participation, preventing factions from getting too strong.
And the courts, crucial for Gorgias.
Absolutely crucial. The legal system dominated by these huge popular courts, the dicasteria, juries of hundreds, sometimes thousands of citizens, also picked by lot. They were judge and jury, no professional lawyers like we have.
Right.
So here's the critical point for you, the citizen in this system. Speaking persuasively wasn't just helpful, it was quite literally the fundamental currency of power and the primary tool for survival.
You had to argue your own case.
Prosecute or defend yourself in court. Your political career, your money, your reputation, even your life could hang entirely on your ability to persuade hundreds of your fellow citizens.
That's immense pressure.
Immense. And this system, combined with Athens' wealth as this growing empire, it created this fervent and competitive market for education and public speaking. Society demanded it.
You've laid out that market for persuasion perfectly. The rise of the sophists, people like Gorgias, and his incredible success among them, it wasn't some weird fluke. It was the direct, almost necessary consequence of this specific political setup.
The system created the demand.
It actively created the conditions that made them indispensable. Think about it.
Yeah.
Traditional aristocratic leadership based on birthright, inherited wealth, old networks that was being challenged.
By a new model.
Based on individual talent and critically rhetorical skill. This created a kind of critical skills gap. Ambitious young men, whether they were old nobles adapting or newly wealthy guys wanting to rise, they all saw it. Mastering logos was the key, the absolute key to getting ahead, staying safe, having influence.
And the sophists stepped in to fill that gap.
Exactly. These professional, traveling educators. They offered a kind of higher education, tailored specifically for the democratic citizen. Not just rhetoric, but other useful stuff too.
And Gorgias, with his flashy new style, proven effective.
He was the ultimate supplier for this high-stakes market. He was exactly what ambitious Athenians thought they needed, which then raises the question, well, how did he fit into the broader sophist movement?
Right, because they weren't all the same.
Not at all. Important to remember, the sophists weren't a unified school. No shared doctrine, no membership card. They were diverse, independent educators, traveling, teaching for fees.
What was their general aim?
Generally, teaching our fasuito, which originally meant aristocratic virtue, but by then it meant excellence, success, effectiveness in civic and political life. And the core of that new curriculum was almost always rhetoric.
And Gorgias was a big name among them.
One of the biggest.
Yeah.
Consistently named as one of the key older sophists, along with Protagoras, Hippias, Protagoras. Some even call him the father of sophistry because his innovations were so influential. And like other sophists, he got famous or notorious for claiming he could argue any position. Contradictory ones even. And that famous phrase, make the weaker argument the stronger.
That phrase always comes up. What did it really mean?
It highlights their focus on the power of argumentation itself, often completely separate from whether the argument was based on, objective truth. It was about the technique, the force of the argument.
That distinction is absolutely key. Let's maybe compare him to his great contemporary Protagoras to see the difference.
Good idea. Protagoras also a major sophist.
Right. Protagoras famously taught political virtue. His big slogan was, "Man is the measure of all things." His goal seemed to be about equipping citizens to succeed within the specific beliefs and conventions, the nomoi of their own community.
So kind of relative to the society.
Yeah, what was good or just depended on the community's agreements. It was fundamentally a political and ethical project aimed at making people effective within their polis.
Okay, so Protagoras is teaching civic virtue in a relativistic way.
Yeah.
How does Gorgias contrast?
Starkly. Gorgias reportedly disclaimed the ability to teach virtue at all. He just didn't claim to do it. His focus was narrower, but maybe, like you said, more radical. He taught rhetoric as a pure, value-neutral technique.
Like a tool.
Exactly. So what does this difference mean? It's not just about teaching styles. It seems to come from a much deeper philosophical disagreement about truth and reality.
Exactly right. That deeper philosophical divergence is crucial, and it really sets Gorgias apart. Gorgias's skepticism, which we get a glimpse of from summaries of his lost work on the nonexistent, it was just far more corrosive, far more radical than Protagoras' relativism.
How so? Corrosive in what way?
Well, where Protagoras, with his man is the measure, sort of relativized truth, saying it might vary from person to person or culture to culture, Gorgias's arguments, or at least how they're reported, seem to just obliterate the very possibility of knowing or communicating anything certain about reality.
Not just relative truth, but maybe no access to truth at all.
That's the implication. It wasn't just about subjective views. It was questioning whether there's an objective reality we can grasp and share through language, a much deeper skepticism.
Okay, so if you hold that kind of radical epistemological position, doubting knowledge itself, how does that affect what you teach?
It has a direct pedagogical outcome. If there's no knowable objective reality out there to be grasped, then there's no objective standard of virtue you can truly know and therefore teach. So you can't really claim to teach virtue in that comprehensive way Protagoras did.
Because there's no objective good to teach.
Or at least no way to be sure you found it and can transmit it. So if you can't teach the content of virtue because it's unknowable, what's left? The only thing left to teach, the only effective skill in that world, is mastery of the medium of human interaction itself, which is logos, language, persuasion.
So the focus shifts entirely to the tool because the supposed object truth virtue is out of reach.
Precisely. Gorgias's focus on rhetoric as this neutral techno, this powerful tool that could be used for good or ill, like a craftsman's knife, with no inherent moral direction that was the logical outcome of his philosophical premises. He represents this more specialized, maybe more unsettling, wing of the Sophistic movement. Persuasion as a force in its own right, completely detached from any necessary moral or factual grounding.
It does sound unsettling. And very modern in some ways. It really does. And that profound, maybe unsettling detachment leads us right into part 2. The architecture of persuasion and doubt, looking at Gorgias's philosophical and rhetorical genius together.
Where the theory meets the practice.
Exactly. Let's dive into the heart of his most radical philosophical contribution, his big philosophical work, the treatise on the nonexistent, sometimes called On Nature, sadly. It's lost. A huge loss.
A tragedy for philosophy.
Its central, totally mind-bending argument survives in 2 ancient summaries, which is incredibly lucky for us. It lets us reconstruct his audacious claims.
And audacious they were.
He presents this masterpiece of dialectical argument, structured as this formidable trilemma, a 3-part argument designed to just systematically dismantle the possibility of being, knowledge, and communication.
1, 2, 3, punch.
Totally. The 3 theses, in order. First, that nothing exists. Second, that even if anything did exist, it could not be known. And third, that even if it could be known, it could not be communicated to another person.
It's a philosophical wrecking ball.
It really is. A systematic assault on our most basic assumptions about reality.
Okay, let's break down that first thesis. Nothing exists. This is ontology, right? An argument about the nature of being itself. And it's directly aimed at undermining the Eleatic school, particularly Parmenides.
Parmenides, who argued being is one, eternal, unchanging.
Right. Gorgias uses this method of dialectical refutation. He rigorously considers all the possibilities for existence. If anything exists, it must be either what is, something that exists, or what is not, nothing, or maybe both.
He knocks out what is not and both pretty quickly.
Yeah, dismisses them as incoherent or impossible to conceive. Then he focuses on what is and argues through these intricate logical steps that can't exist either.
Give us an example of that logic. It sounds tricky.
It is, and maybe a bit intentionally slippery sometimes. But for instance, he argues, if what is were eternal, it would have no beginning, therefore it would be infinite, without limit. But if it's without limit, it can't be anywhere, because being somewhere implies boundaries. And if it's nowhere, Gorgias concludes, well, then it's not. It doesn't exist.
Okay. That's a tight logical chain, even if it feels counterintuitive.
It is. And he has similar arguments against it being generated. Where would it come from? Not nothing, not something that already is, or against it being one or many. Both possibilities crumble under his logical attack. So through this chain of rigorous, maybe sometimes specious logic, he concludes that existence itself, as philosophers like Parmenides conceived it, is just an incoherent concept. Trying to pin it down with logic just leads to contradiction.
A philosophical dead end for being. Okay, thesis 2.
Even if anything did exist, it would be unknowable. Here, he takes aim at another core Eleatic idea from Parmenides again, the famous link between thinking and being. Thinking and being are the same.
The idea that what you can truly think must truly be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gorgias just snaps that link. He points to the obvious gap between what's in our minds and what's actually out there in the world.
How does he illustrate that?
With simple examples. You can easily think of things that clearly don't exist, right? Like his example of chariots racing in the sea. Or you could think of a unicorn or a flying person.
Right. Thoughts aren't always real things.
Precisely. So if what is thought isn't necessarily real, then it follows logically that what is real isn't necessarily something we can think about accurately or access reliably. The mind's operations are just fundamentally separate from external reality.
Mm-hmm.
So even if reality exists, it's inaccessible and incomprehensible to thought. Our minds aren't perfect mirrors.
Okay, existence is incoherent, and even if it weren't, we couldn't know it. What's the third nail in the coffin?
Even if it could be known, it could not be communicated.
Yeah.
And this one hits right at the heart of his rhetorical practice.
Right.
The medium we use to communicate is logos words.
Right.
But, Gorgias argues profoundly, words are not the things they are meant to represent. There's a fundamental disconnect.
Explain that disconnect.
Think about it. There's the external object itself, say a specific tree. Then there's your unique sensory perception of it, how you see that tree, the green you perceive. And then there's the word we use, tree. 3 distinct things.
Okay, object, perception, word.
Right. We communicate the word, an acoustic symbol, a visual sign, not the underlying substance, not the actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
He uses this analogy. Information from one sense can't be directly transmitted to another, right? You can't hear a color directly.
No.
Similarly, the reality perceived by my senses can't be perfectly transplanted into your mind using the totally different medium of language. My subjective experience of green can never be precisely identical to yours, and the word green is just a label we agree on. It's not the experience itself.
So language is always mediating, always at a distance from reality and even from direct experience.
Exactly. It's a powerful, deeply skeptical claim about the limits of communication.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this? The profound strategic purpose behind On the Nonexistent, it's probably not just Gorgias despairing about philosophy.
No, it seems much more calculated than that.
Right. It's like a foundational text that, by tearing down the claims of traditional metaphysics and epistemology, logically clears the ground. It makes space for rhetoric to step up and claim the role of the supreme art.
Because if philosophy can't reach truth,
What else is there? The whole pre-Socratic project, especially the Eleatics, believed that rational logos could give us direct access to true being, to reality. Gorgias just systematically snips that connection at every possible point. Reality to mind, snipped. Mind to language, snipped.
leaving a vacuum.
A huge intellectual vacuum.
Okay.
If we can't access objective truth to guide us, how do we make decisions? In court, in the assembly, in life.
What's left to rely on?
The only possible answer in the world Gorgias describes is doxa, opinion, belief. And how is doxa shaped? By persuasive logos, by compelling arguments.
Not by correspondence to some external truth.
Exactly. In the world of On the Nonexistent, rhetoric isn't some flawed backup plan when philosophy fails. It's the only game in town, the only functional, relevant form of public discourse. So the treatise itself is like the philosophical license, the theoretical justification for the absolute power of rhetoric that he taught and practiced.
That makes perfect sense. Moving from that deep theoretical foundation to, well, a dazzling practical demonstration, let's turn to his most famous surviving work, the Encomium of Helen.
Ah, Helen of Troy.
The face that launched 1,000 ships and centuries of blame. This speech is the perfect example of epidictic oratory display oratory. It's not trying to get the audience to do something, but to praise someone or blame them, and mainly to impress everyone with the speaker's incredible skill.
And the stated goal here.
To praise Helen of Troy, and in doing so, completely absolve her of blame for causing the Trojan War.
Which everyone thought was impossible, right? She was the ultimate scapegoat.
Exactly. So defending her was the perfect challenge, the perfect vehicle to demonstrate rhetorical power by doing that classic sophistic move, making the weaker argument the stronger. If he could make Helen seem innocent, he could argue anything.
Okay, so how does he do it? What's his method?
It's a brilliant argument by exhaustion of alternatives. He says, look, there are only 4 possible reasons why Helen went to Troy.
Only 4. What are they?
1, she acted by the will of the gods, by fate. 2, she was taken by physical force, bia. 3, she was persuaded by words, by logos. Or 4, she was overcome by love, by eros.
Okay, divine will, force, words, or love.
Right. And then he argues systematically that in none of these cases can Helen be held morally responsible. If it was the gods' will, well, humans can't fight the gods. She's blameless.
Makes sense.
If she was taken by force, she's obviously a victim, deserving pity, not blame. Again, blameless.
Okay. The first 2 seem straightforward enough defenses. What about words and love?
Ah, that's where it gets really interesting, especially the argument about words.
Yes. Let's focus on that, because this seems to be the core of the speech and connects back to his whole philosophy of logos.
Absolutely. This is where he lays out his revolutionary theory of logos. He doesn't treat speech as just, conveying information or suggesting ideas. He elevates it to a quasi-physical power, a force.
Quasi-physical. How so?
He literally describes logos as a powerful lord. Logos dunastos megas esti. A potensate, a ruler, that accomplishes divine works using the smallest, most invisible body's words.
Wow, powerful lord. That's strong language.
It is. And his most famous move is comparing the effect of speech on the soul, the psyche, to the action of drugs, pharmaca, on the body.
The drug metaphor, that's crucial.
It is. Let me read that famous quote because it's so vivid. Just as different drugs draw forth different humors from the body, some putting a stop to disease, others to life, so too with words. Some cause pain, others joy, some strike fear, some stir the audience to boldness, some benumb and bewitch the soul with evil persuasion.
Benumb and bewitch the soul. It sounds like magic.
Exactly. This introduces the concept of psychagogia, literally, soul leading by words. It paints the orator not just as a communicator, but as a kind of enchanter, a spellcaster, whose words can overwhelm the listener's rational will, like a group hypnosis.
It really shifts the agency, doesn't it? From the listener choosing to believe to the speaker compelling belief.
That analogy of speech as a pharmacon, a drug, a potion, a charm, it's absolutely central to understanding his view of language. It's almost materialistic.
How do you mean materialistic?
Well, in Gorgias' framework here, logos isn't just an abstract system of symbols we decode rationally. It's depicted as this tangible force, almost like a substance, that acts on the soul with the same kind of coercive power as physical violence.
So words can hit you like a fist, metaphorically speaking.
That's the implication. Look at the structure of his argument in the Encomium. He puts persuasion by logos on the exact same level, causally, as being abducted by physical force. By it, or being compelled by the gods. That's a radical equalization. It blurs the lines between mental and physical compulsion.
Okay, I see that. It treats them as equivalent forces acting on Helen.
Right. And the drug metaphor is key because pharmaca, in the ancient world, were understood as physical things that chemically altered the body, often bypassing your conscious choice or rational will. They could heal, yes, but also poison, intoxicate, bewitch.
Things that happen to you.
Exactly. Gorgias implies logos works just like that on the psyche. It affects us deeply, maybe pre-rationally, which raises a really important and frankly unsettling question.
The ethical implications.
Profound ethical and legal implications. If that traditional line between voluntary and involuntary action just collapses, if you can be compelled by an argument just like you can be compelled by force, what happens to moral responsibility?
It seems to diminish or vanish entirely for the person persuaded.
Exactly. Responsibility shifts dramatically. It moves from the person who is persuaded, like Helen, to the person who did the persuading, the orator.
The speaker becomes responsible for the listener's actions.
That's the radical core of his defense of Helen. And it's the foundation of a rhetorical theory that sees language not as a neutral tool for finding truth, but as this active, potent force for creating reality in the minds of the audience. Language makes things happen.
That is a profound and, quite unsettling idea. Language as a reality-creating drug. Okay, so from the dazzling display of the encomium meant to praise and impress, let's shift gears. Let's go to the practical world, the high-stakes arena of the courtroom, and look at the defense of Palamedes.
Right, another surviving work, probably a model speech.
A model for the forensic, the legal genre. It's a fictional self-defense. Palamedes, the mythological hero, supposedly framed for treason by his rival Odysseus and then executed by the Greeks.
A classic case of injustice in myth.
Exactly. And the speech is this brilliant demonstration of how to argue when there's zero direct evidence. The verdict has to be based solely on competing stories, competing logoi.
Which happens all the time in real course, too.
For sure. And the central technique here is that argument from probability, eikos, that we mentioned earlier, developed by those Sicilians, perfected by Gorgias.
How does Palamedes use it?
Well, since the accuser, Odysseus, offers no witnesses, no hard proof, just rumor and accusation, Palamedes builds his entire defense by meticulously showing how extremely unlikely the charge is. He doesn't just shout, "I'm innocent." He dismantles the accusation logically.
Breaks it down.
Step by step. He says, okay, for this treason to have happened, a whole series of things must have occurred.
Yeah.
First, a meeting with the enemy Trojans, then communication how with the language barrier, then exchanging pledges money, hostages. Yeah. Where's the proof? Then carrying out the plot without anyone noticing.
Seems improbable when you list it like that.
Exactly. He shows each step is either practically impossible, would have left evidence that isn't there, or would require a motive like greed for wealth, desire for power or honor, that he, Palamedes, argues convincingly he doesn't have. He appeals to his known character. He's basically saying, look at the logic, look at me. This story just doesn't add up. It's not probable.
So the defense of Palamedes can really be seen as the direct, practical application of that philosophical skepticism we saw in On the Nonexistent.
And so, connect those dots.
Well, the courtroom becomes this perfect little model of the human condition described in the treatise. The judges weren't there when the supposed crime happened. They cannot access the truth directly.
They're stuck with competing accounts.
Exactly. They have to reconstruct reality based only on the two competing logois and the arguments presented by the accuser and the defendant. And Palamedes explicitly calls out Odysseus for relying on mere doxa opinion, prejudice, rumor, instead of providing arguments based on knowledge, episteme, or truth, aletheia.
He demands a higher standard of proof based on likelihood.
Right. Palamedes' defense isn't claiming absolute truth, because maybe that's impossible anyway. Instead, he uses rigorous logic, logos, to construct a more compelling, more coherent, and overwhelmingly more likely narrative. He rejects appeals to raw emotion, pathos, and focuses on his character ethos, and above all, the logic of probability.
So justice in this Gorgian framework.
It's achieved not by discovering some hidden absolute truth, but through the rigorous and logical valuation of competing probabilities as presented through speech. It's about finding the most reasonable account in a world of uncertainty, a remarkably pragmatic approach.
It really is. Okay, so beyond these philosophical theories and these big rhetorical demonstrations, Gorgias was also just a master craftsman of language itself. He permanently changed how Greek was written and spoken.
A stylistic innovator.
Hugely. He's widely credited as a primary innovator of artistic literary prose. He systematically took the fancy tools of poetry, the rhythm, the figures of speech, the sound effects, and transplanted them into oratory, into prose.
Before him, prose was mostly just functional.
Largely, yeah. Historical records, basic speeches, philosophical arguments, pretty straightforward, often unadorned. But after Gorgias, prose itself became this vehicle for the same kind of sonic pleasure, emotional power, and structural beauty as verse.
So he made prose beautiful and powerful in a new way.
Exactly. His style was famously elaborate, almost over the top sometimes. Florid, poetic language, lots of metaphors, and this highly structured rhythmic quality. It must have sounded amazing.
But later critics weren't always fans.
No. While it clearly captivated his 5th century audiences, who'd never heard anything like it, later figures like Plato and Aristotle criticized it. Called it garish, excessive, maybe even distracting or manipulative. Too much style over substance in their view.
What's really fascinating here, though, and sometimes gets missed, is that the core of his stylistic revolution was the development and popularization of these specific rhetorical devices. We now call them the Gorgianic figures.
Okay, tell us about those.
They're mostly based on 2 key principles: parallelism, arranging words or clauses in similar structures, and antithesis, setting contrasting ideas side by side for impact.
Give us some specific examples.
Sure. There's antithesis itself, like not by chance, but by design.
Yeah.
Then there's isocolon, or parasosis. These are parallel clauses of the same, or nearly the same, length and structure. Like in the Helen speech, by fate she was driven, by force she was taken, by word she was persuaded, by love she was captured. See that balance?
Yeah, it creates a real rhythm, a feeling of completeness.
Exactly. It sounds authoritative, almost logically inevitable just because of the structure. Then you have paranomasia, wordplay, often using words that sound similar but mean different things, or variations on a root word, creates memorable little hooks.
Clever.
And homotilishan, similar endings of words or clauses, basically rhyme and prose, like he came with speed, fulfilling the need, planting the seed. It creates this sonic echo, this resonance.
Okay, so parallelism, antithesis, balanced clauses, wordplay, rhyme. But were these just fancy decorations?
Ah, that's the crucial insight. For Gorgias, these figures were not just decorative flourishes you sprinkle on top of an argument. For him, style was substance. The formal, almost musical structures of his prose were the very mechanism through which the persuasive force of his logos worked.
The structure did the persuading.
In large part, yes. Remember the Encomium of Helen? He explicitly calls speech a form of magic, of bewitchment.
Right, the drug metaphor again.
Exactly. And think about Greek culture. The power of poetry, of sacred incantations, it was understood to come largely from their formal properties. The meter, the rhythm, the repetition, the sound patterns. Gorgias systematically imported those structures into prose. He knew sound and rhythm could bypass purely rational thought and hit the soul directly.
So he didn't just say speech was magic.
He literally engineered his speeches to be magical charms. The form wasn't separate from the content. The form was a crucial part of the persuasive force. It embodied his whole theory of language in its very performance. The sound was the sense, in a way.
That's incredible. The idea that the sound, the structure itself, could be the enchantment. Wow. Okay, to really get the full measure of Gorgias's radicalism, we need to understand who he was arguing against, the philosophical giants he was grappling with.
The context matters.
It does. His most profound intellectual sparring partner was the Eleatic school, founded by Parmenides of Elea and defended so fiercely by his student Zeno.
The philosophers of unchanging being.
Exactly. Parmenides, in his famous poem, laid out this radical modism. He drew this absolute hard line between two paths of inquiry, the path of what is the only thing you can truly think about or know, and the path of what is not, which he said was just unthinkable, unspeakable, pure nothingness.
And for Parmenides, reality being what is.
It's one, eternal, unchanging, and whole. All the change and motion and variety we see with our senses, that's all illusion, deception. And the cornerstone, as you mentioned before, was identifying thinking with being, for the same thing as for thinking and for being. If you can truly think it, it must be.
A very demanding, abstract view of reality. And Zeno's role was critical in defending it.
How did Zeno defend such a counterintuitive idea?
Not really with positive proofs for being, but by attacking the alternatives. He used these ingenious paradoxes to show that our common sense beliefs, like that things move or that there are many different things, actually lead to inescapable logical contradictions if you think about them rigorously.
The famous paradoxes. Achilles and the tortoise.
Right, or the arrow paradox, where he proves a flying arrow is always at rest. His method was the reductio ad absurdum. He'd take his opponent's assumption, like motion exists, follow its logical implications, and show it leads to absurdity. Therefore, the opposite must be true. Motion is an illusion.
Clever, if infuriating.
Definitely. So if we connect this Eleatic project back to Gorgias, his treatise On the Nonexistent looks like a masterful and deeply ironic inversion of their whole approach.
He uses their own weapons against them.
Brilliantly. He adopts Zeno's rigorous deductive dialectical method, but applies it not to defend being, but to achieve its utter demolition. He takes the logical tools the Eleatics perfected and turns them right back onto the foundations of their own system.
So where Parmenides argued what is not can't be thought, Gorgias uses similar logic.
To show that what is equally incoherent and impossible to think consistently, he basically says your own logic, the very tool you use to prove being is one and unchanging, can also be used to prove that nothing exists at all.
That's a devastating move, philosophically.
It's a pivotal moment. It's where philosophical method gets turned back on itself and revealed, potentially, as just another form of rhetorical technology.
Meaning logic isn't a window onto truth.
That's the implication Gorgias forces. The Eleatics presented their deductive logic as the only reliable path to objective truth, dismissing everything else. Zeno honed it into this powerful weapon. Gorgias grabs that weapon and aims it right back at the heart of Eleatic doctrine itself, being.
And by showing it, can prove the opposite.
He demonstrates that the logical method itself might be neutral. It doesn't necessarily discover a pre-existing reality. Rather, it's a powerful tool for constructing and deconstructing arguments. In other words, logic itself is a rhetorical art.
Wow. That transforms logic from discovery to invention. A profound metaphilosophical point.
Hugely profound. It anticipates centuries of later critiques of pure reason.
Okay, so that's his engagement with the Eleatics. But for most of Western history, our view of Gorgias hasn't really come directly from appreciating that context. It's been filtered through one specific, very powerful lens. Plato, the Platonic refraction. For centuries, Gorgias has been known primarily through Plato's dialogue named after him, the Gorgias, probably written around 380 BCE, not long after Gorgias died, when his ideas and influence were still very much alive.
And Plato stages quite a confrontation in that dialogue.
He does. Socrates takes on Gorgias himself, then his more aggressive student Pallas, and finally the really hard-nosed Athenian aristocrat Callicles, who kind of represents the amoral endpoint of rhetoric, might makes right.
How does Socrates critique Gorgias in the dialogue?
Through his usual method, the elenchus, that relentless questioning, he forces Gorgias to admit that rhetoric aims at persuasion, creating pistis, mere belief or conviction in the audience, without providing genuine episteme, true knowledge.
Belief without knowledge.
Exactly. And crucially, Socrates denies rhetoric is even a true art, a technique. He calls it just a knack, an empiria, something you pick up through experience, aimed only at producing gratification and pleasure.
Like cooking. That's the famous analogy, right?
That's the one. He classifies rhetoric as a form of flattery, kolokeia, just like fancy cooking is a form of flattery for the body. Cookery pleases the palate, but doesn't know it's truly healthy. Rhetoric, Socrates argues, pleases the soul's desires for power and applause, but doesn't know what's truly just or good for it. It just makes things seem good.
It's a devastating critique. But it's vital, isn't it, to distinguish the literary character Gorgias in Plato's dialogue from the historical figure?
Absolutely essential. Plato's Gorgias comes across as polite, maybe a bit vain, but ultimately philosophically out of his depth. He gets tied in knots by Socrates' logic, but this portrayal is almost certainly a strategic caricature.
Crafted by Plato for his own purposes.
Definitely. The dialogue isn't aiming for historical accuracy. It's staging this fundamental clash between two worldviews. Philosophy, the pursuit of truth and the good, versus sophistry, the manipulative pursuit of power through appearances.
So Plato recognized Gorgias' power, but saw it as a threat.
A direct threat. Plato saw the immense power of Gorgianic rhetoric, its ability to sway courts and assemblies. And this power, completely untied from truth or virtue, was dangerous to the Socratic Platonic project, which insisted that knowledge of the good must be the only legitimate basis for power.
So Socrates, in the dialogue, doesn't deny rhetoric works.
No, he acknowledges its effectiveness, its persuasive force. What he denies is its legitimacy. He delegitimizes it by calling it an irrational knack, devoid of real knowledge.
And then he does something even more clever.
The co-option move.
Exactly. Socrates then sort of co-opts the term. He imagines this hypothetical, true philosophical rhetoric, one completely different from Gorgias's.
What would that look like?
It would be grounded in the philosopher's knowledge of justice, of the forms of goodness and beauty, and its aim wouldn't be to flatter or persuade falsely, but to genuinely improve the souls of the citizens, guided by that absolute knowledge.
So he tries to tame rhetoric, make it serve philosophy.
Precisely. He attempts to domesticate rhetoric, turning it from this powerful, independent rival into a subservient tool for implementing philosophical truth. And the incredible lasting influence of Plato's Gorgias dialogue just shows how successful Plato's own rhetorical strategy was. For millennia, Gorgias' radical vision has been seen mainly through this powerful, often distorting Platonic critique.
It's ironic. Plato uses rhetoric to condemn rhetoric, or at least Gorgias' version of it. Okay, given this complex history, this battle over his legacy, how do modern scholars see Gorgias? His deliberate ambiguity, his playfulness, it still sparks debate.
It really does. You can basically identify three main lines of interpretation in modern scholarship, trying to figure out what he was really up to.
What's the first one?
The oldest view is Gorgias the nihilist. This takes on the non-existent. Completely, literally, he genuinely argued nothing exists, knowledge is impossible, communication is futile, full-blown nihilism.
But that view has problems.
Big problems. It's fundamentally self-refuting, right? If communication is impossible, why write a treatise arguing that point? The act contradicts the message. So most scholars today reject pure nihilism.
Okay, what's the second interpretation?
Gorgias the radical skeptic. This is more moderate. It suggests he wasn't denying reality exists, but making a serious philosophical point about the severe limitations of human knowledge and language. His work highlights the unbridgeable gap between our subjective experience and any objective world out there. We just can't know it for sure or communicate it perfectly.
More focused on epistemology and language limitations.
Exactly. A skeptical stance about our abilities rather than about reality itself.
And the third view, which you said is more dominant now.
Right. Gorgias, the performer and satirist. This view sees his philosophical works primarily as dazzling displays of rhetorical skill, intellectual performances, not necessarily statements of sincere belief.
So, On the Nonexistent wasn't a serious claim about reality.
In this view, it was more like an ingenious parody of Eleatic philosophy, showing their own logical methods could be used to prove absurd conclusions, thereby satirizing their dogmatism.
And the Encomium and Palamedes.
Seen as pedagogical models, maybe brilliant advertisements for his teaching, showcasing his incredible ability to make any case persuasive, no matter how difficult. So his big claims are seen as fundamentally playful, ironic, maybe satirical. He's showing off what logos can do, rather than telling us what is.
Okay, stylist, radical skeptic, or performer satirist. But maybe there's another way to look at it.
Well, what's truly fascinating here, and I'd really challenge you, the listener, to think about this. Maybe this modern debate presents a false choice. Why does he have to be either a philosopher or a performer?
You think they can be unified?
I think the most coherent, most powerful reading of Gorgias is one that completely collapses that distinction. For him, the two are inseparable, maybe even identical.
How so? What's his actual philosophy, then, in this unified view?
His actual philosophy, arguably, is that human reality, the reality that matters in the courtroom, in the political assembly, in the public square, in our social lives, is fundamentally a performance constructed by logos. It's not about finding truth out there. It's about shaping a shared reality through language in here, between us.
So his works aren't just about performance.
They are philosophical arguments enacted as performances. They are living demonstrations of the theory. Think about how the works fit together. On the Nonexistent shows, theoretically, that metaphysical logos can't grasp external reality. Then the Encomium of Helen immediately follows, demonstrating practically that rhetorical logos is, in contrast, this incredibly powerful, coercive, reality-shaping force. It can change minds, change truths. And then the defense of Palamedes shows how civic and legal reality isn't about absolute truth, but is decided based on probable logos, skillfully constructed narratives.
So the common thread is?
The supreme, autonomous power of language itself, detached from any stable external truth. So therefore, when Gorgias proves Helen is innocent or proves nothing exists, the performance isn't just an ad for his philosophy. It is the living demonstration of his philosophy.
Because his philosophy is about the power of performative language.
Exactly. His core claim is that the power of logos to shape belief, create social reality, compel action is the most potent force in human affairs. And how do you truly prove a claim like that? You can only do it. You demonstrate it. For Gorgias, to perform is to philosophize. He blurred those lines in a way that still challenges us profoundly today. #outro.
What an incredible journey. Through the mind, the arguments, the dazzling performance of Gorgias of Leontini, he really does emerge as this figure of, profound complexity and lasting significance. We've seen his contributions on so many levels. As a stylistic innovator, forging artistic prose with those Gorgianic figures, giving speech the power of poetry.
Changing the sound of language.
As a foundational theorist and practitioner of rhetoric, especially with that argument from probability, giving us a way to judge in uncertain situations.
A practical tool for democracy.
And as a philosopher mounting this radical, unsettling challenge to metaphysics and epistemology, questioning if we can ever truly know or communicate reality.
Shaking the very foundations.
But his legacy, as we discussed, it's so paradoxical. On one hand, he's a founding father of the whole Western rhetorical tradition. You can trace his influence right through Isocrates, Aristotle, Cicero, all the way down.
Hugely influential.
Yet, on the other hand, his reputation got so effectively, so brilliantly maligned by Plato, as you put it, that for centuries, his name basically meant amoral sophistry. Just clever, deceptive word games without truth. He got stuck in that hostile Platonic frame.
The power of Plato's narrative.
It really is. So what does this all mean for you listening now? It's precisely this tension, this unresolved paradox that makes Gorgias so relevant, so vital still. The questions he raised about language, truth, power, they're not just historical curiosities, they are perennial. They echo right now.
They haven't gone away.
Not at all. His radical insight that logos, language, can function as this powerful world-creating force operating independently of any verifiable external truth. That idea totally prefigures central concerns in modern and postmodern thought. From Nietzsche's critique of truth to contemporary ideas about discourse, communication, how society constructs reality.
He was way ahead of his time in some way.
Absolutely. In our age, saturated with persuasive media, with political rhetoric that often seems completely untethered from facts, with the way reality gets constructed and contested online,
Yeah.
Gorgias remains this deeply unsettling but totally indispensable thinker. He forces you to confront, clear-eyed, the awesome and potentially amoral power packed into words themselves. A power that can, as he said, enchant and heal, but also deceive and compel.
Which leads us, naturally, to ask a crucial question, something for all of us to really chew on. If Gorgias showed us, or at least argued powerfully, that logic and language are fundamentally neutral tools, capable of constructing any reality, any belief system, what immense responsibility does that place on us?
Both as speakers and listeners.
Exactly. As people crafting messages and as critical listeners trying to evaluate the flood of truths we encounter every single day, how do we even navigate a world where, as Gorgias demonstrated, the performance can be the philosophy, where rhetoric can literally create reality for people? What does it even mean to be well-informed, to be truly discerning in that kind of landscape?
That's a heavy question to end on.
It is. But one Gorgias compels us to ask. We really encourage you to seek out the original sources, the surviving speeches, the summaries of his thought, and continue this fascinating exploration for yourself.
Definitely worth the effort. Thank you for joining us on AI History of Western Philosophy.